Hey guys, welcome back to the Paladins Alliance. Happy New Year to all of you folks at home. And I know it's been a while, but I'd like to start having more consistent YouTube uploads this year. I'm going to be trying to have at least one video uploaded every week, be it on this channel or other podcasts around the space. So definitely keep an eye on that. I'll try to post every video that I'm a part of onto that YouTube feed. So basically, make sure to check out all the sort of content that I tried to develop this year. But that's the big push for 2024, and I hope you guys join me on the ride. So as 2024 rolls in, I'd like to start creating a series that I look at every year where I make way too early predictions, start to pose some important questions to you guys as you're watching these events and build that narrative. So moving into the following year, we can kind of look back at what we've already experienced, take away some key points as to where the esport is heading and where it's already explored in the year prior. So to kick started off, I want to basically talk about the three biggest things that I noticed in 2023 so that when we try to make predictions at 2024, although they're going to be a little crazy, a little bit out of the place, it might still be interesting to see and gather information from the previous year and see what we can apply in 2024. So in 2023, I think the three biggest things, one, it's the volatility. We didn't really truly have a team of the year, so to speak. We did have Vitality win the most in terms of trophies lifted, but we also had G2 at number one at a certain point in time where they lifted Kato and Cologne. We also had FaZe having a huge slew of tournament wins at the start of CS2. And then we also had Heroic having these really deep runs as well, and you saw that they were still able to get that number one spot just because of the number of deep placings that they had. So overall, 4 different number ones across the year. That's not necessarily something you get to have all throughout various years in Counter-Strike. You look at 2019, we had Liquid staying on top of things for a long period of time. We had 2018, of course, Astralis. And, you look at all these various years, and sure, there were number one teams that were able to sneak in here or there. But in terms of these wide swaths of the year, it was usually dominated by one team. But that was never the case in 2023. There's definitely a lot more volatility, and that's probably my number one thing that I would look at as far as 2023 is concerned. We obviously had the big shift from Go to CS2, and I know that the changes in terms of the teams weren't necessarily seismic. We didn't have these crazy big number one team, number two teams switching up, but we will say that FaZe, of course, had that big jump up in terms of motivation as they were sort of falling off at the tail end of Go. Especially after they closed out that Grand Slam, it felt like they were running out of steam, but they still found some rejuvenation. You had VP speeding back up, finding a lot more pep in their step in terms of their default speeding up. We saw them at Atlanta. We saw them going deep at Yacht Tripping, Bet Boom Dacha, and even at the Party Dunov party. So they had a lot of great tournaments in their own right, but they were speeding up. And of course, Complexity surprising all of us after having that huge tournament, the final appearance at Sydney. Huge performance from them. Super awesome to see a North American team back into the mix. But having Liege finally hitting that stride with this roster was super awesome. And you also had some players dive down in terms of the limelight. You had Sun Pius dropping off in those last 3 months. You had Nico having some drop off. He obviously picked it back up at the World Finals, but he kind of still struggled. And then on C9, Axile wasn't necessarily that rifler of the year that we were hoping for after seeing the performance that he had in 2022. Didn't necessarily have that sort of performance from him in 23. So looking forward to see whether or not the individuals change up there, because as far as the teams are concerned, there was some movement up and down in terms of certain teams understood the game a little bit better than others, and some individuals as well picked up in form. You look at Rops finding a new gear in terms of his performance. Of course, that's a huge thing to look forward to. Zaiwu still finding the footing, confirming that number one spot in terms of the individuals for top 20. And yeah, of course, Monacy also figuring out the AWP. A lot of that conversation is definitely going to be talked about in 2024. And then finally, I think for me as an analyst, I think it was a little bit harder to place the top 20 this year and team of the year conversation just because we only had one major in the year. We only had 13 S tier lands, bar the blast groups, of course. And so it made things a little bit more difficult for me as an analyst to peg where these teams are at, try to set a narrative. And I think 2024 it'll also be very similar, where at least we'll have two majors, so it'll be a little easier to potentially paint the picture as to where these teams are headed. And I think 2025 will become even more easier as we move into open circuit. Maybe we have more tournaments to discuss as well. But yeah, overall, 2023 was a difficult year for me personally to kind of figure out where these teams are headed, and especially with some teams taking these 2023 lands, not even accepting all of the lands as a whole, some of them skipping out as well. It did make things a little bit more difficult overall to actually figure out where these teams are headed. But yeah, that's kind of where I see 2023 as a whole. The volatility was one important thing, difficulty in actually placing these teams in terms of narratives, and as well that big shift from CSGO to CS2. But we'll jump into those actual questions that I'd like to ask and what my very early predictions are that we can kind of check and take a look at the beginning of 2025. I think the first question that I'm going to pose is not necessarily a very difficult question to answer, but it's more just interesting to keep track of this organization as time goes on. But I think it's the question of how much of a mainstay is Falcons going to be in the Counter-Strike conversation moving into 2024, 2025. And of course, when we move into the new year, we will have that open circuit to allow for some of these teams that aren't necessarily partnered to be a part of these programs a little bit more readily. And you look at the previous iterations that Falcons had brought forward and you think, yeah, I think they have the recipe for success. They should at least become in the conversation, join some of these S-tier lands. Nearly a qualification for the major with the French lineup that they had, what they initially sought out after. And then you move forward a little bit further, they have this glass cannon EU roster chock full with talent across the board from the previous major cycles that you felt, oh, these youngsters could have a shot at the top and maybe they start making headway. But turns out NBK wasn't necessarily the best IGL to lead this young roster, and that also fell through. And finally, you had this Falcons roster trying to build somewhat of a super team. You get Snappy on board, you get Magisk on board, you get Zonic on board, and you think, surely Nico's coming down the pipeline, maybe a Monacy, maybe even a Twists. But in the end of all of it, you end up with Snappy, Modern, and Senpai, the core of ENTS. You get to keep Magisk, you get to keep Zonic, you get to have the performance coach of Rob L or something like that. And you have to retain Boros, which isn't necessarily the end-all, be-all that Snappy was probably hoping for, but it is a young prospect nonetheless. So you look at it and you question, can they make a deep run at the major? Can they win a major? What the situation is over in that camp? And I think that's one big question that I have to pose to everybody is how long can they sustain a Counter-Strike team within this space? I think 2024 is going to be difficult for them because, again, they're not going to have too many opportunities. They will be at the Cato play-in, so we will see them there. And perhaps we will see them at the Cologne play-in as well. You inevitably expect to see them at the RMR for the major cycle. But it's those IEMs that you build up across of, will they have the RMR world, the ESL world ranking points to get to those tournaments? And I think that'll really beg the question as to how much of a powerhouse Falcons will be in the future. And it definitely seems like they're willing to pay out the money to buy some good players and some good staff. But the question is how legitimate are they going to stay within the space? And I think my early prediction is a very obvious one. I think they will be a mainstay. They will be a force to be reckoned with in 2025. I think that Snappy's now found his franchise home. I think that Zonic has found his home as well. And I think they have enough pieces to build a foundation in this year. They might not lift major trophies in 2024, but 2025, I think, is where they kick into high gear. They start playing tournaments regularly. They have those reps. And I think that's where you start to see Falcons become a real force of nature within Counter-Strike. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see the trajectory of this team, even with the team that they weren't actually promised. This is now a little bit more of a makeshift team in some ways. It's going to be interesting to see whether they can make do with this team and whether there are going to be changes in the pipeline and how much they can salvage this roster together in the third iteration of the Falcons. I think a big conversation that's going to be recurring on this channel is who the team of the year was in 2024. We look at 2023, you'd probably argue it's Vitality, but you look at the scope of 2024 and where things could head, it could really go any which way. You look at Vitality staying strong moving into the new year, having a very solid system in their own right. You look at FaZe now having to deal with Frozen instead of of course, twists, right? How does that change up come through? You look at Mao's not having Frozen anymore. You look at G2 being aloof with the decisions that they made with Nexa. And, you could also look at the teams that could come up on the rise. You look at Team Liquid, who could potentially be a #1 team. You look at Falcons, who could have figured out the solution with getting a multiple major winner in Magisk, maybe having a unproven talent like Boros, maybe even Navi. You look at Spirit with Donk and Shiro now. There's so many options that you can kind of go for. Maybe even Cloud9 could make a couple of moves in their own right. Virtus Pro are charging up. They've finally got a couple of smaller lands under their belt. Maybe they can prove it in the bigger stages. All throughout these various top 10s and even some of these teams that are not listed, there are still so many opportunities for a team of the year to be decided, and maybe even opportunities that weren't even existent to us previously that could just arise out of the blue. So there's a lot of opportunity for the team of the year. I think it's going to be very interesting to see where things go. To me, I'm going to have to put my money where my mouth is. I've been hyping up about this team for ages now, and I'm going to continue to do it. And I think Liquid really has what it takes to lift trophies and lift trophies consistently for a long period of time. You've got finally a dedicated Opper on this team. Granted, he is an IGL as well, but he seems to get the job done clearly if he's able to make the top 20 from last year, creating one of the best systems that we have in Counter-Strike alongside Heroic previously in his previous team. You look at Twist and what he's able to accomplish, now getting into more star roles. Maybe mechanically he could really flex his muscles a little bit more. That first bullet is so important in CS2, and I think could be a huge boon for Twists. Naf being still as consistent as ever. You look at Skulls, and I know a lot of people think he's a big risk, but I really think that he has the skills and the pedigree to get it done. Even if it's not K-Serado, I think he's hungrier than K-Serado as of right now, and I think that Skulls is going to have a lot to offer. And what I'm saying, of course, Yekidar now back into those prime entering roles. I think he's going to get the job done and then some. So I think Liquid has a lot to prove in 2024, but I think they have a lot of what it takes to complete that as well. I think they can hit the ground running. I think they can go toe-to-toe with a lot of teams in the space right now, especially with how in flux everything is. So I'm going to put my money where I'm out there. So my very early prediction is just going to say that Liquid is going to have what it takes to be a top contender and be that team of the year in 2024. But who knows? I mean, there's a lot of things to prove me wrong here, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to be wrong in some form or fashion when it comes to this question, but I'm going to predict that in and of itself. It's going to be interesting to see how things shake up. Who knows? Maybe Simple returns. Maybe Zaiwu has a fall off. Who the hell knows? But that's my early prediction. I'm going to take Liquid to be my team of the year heading into 2025. The next question that I'm really posing here is more pivoted towards these TOs that have a big task at hand to pivot away from partner teams moving into 2025. And so I think the biggest thing right now for me is how are these TOs going to actually pivot when it comes to the IEMs, when it comes to the blast groups. There's a lot to be asked because you look at Kato, you look at Cologne, they've got things figured out remotely. I mean, you look at the play-in here, as you can see, all the teams that you're expecting to be there are there. You look at the Cologne play-ins, and they already have things set up in such a way that the most important teams should be there. They have a couple of qualifiers to involve some regional teams as well. But overall, it makes a lot of sense. You even look at the actual invites to the tournament itself. You look at Falcons being able to attend that event based off of the world ranking points. That's important. But Blast, I feel, have a really difficult task ahead of them, where they're now expanding to 16 teams. As you can see in their groups, it's still a lot of it's to be decided, and we don't actually have all the information at hand. But still, four more teams to go towards. EG have now fallen out, and I forget which teams actually. Oh yeah, I think it's Cloud9 that's now fallen into the partner system for another year. But we will see what the qualification system is looking like. You looked at the interview that the HLTV did with the commissioner of Blast, and it seems as though they're also very open to expanding the circuit a little bit more. So seeing what the involvement is with their qualifying system is going to be very interesting. Do they expand beyond the showdown? Do they add qualifiers directly into the spring groups? Do they change the circuit completely and add in just maybe challenger type events? Maybe there's a lot of maybes, as you can see in this conversation, and I think Blast has a lot of question marks, and it's going to be very interesting to track the progress of Blast as this year goes on, especially now that they don't have a major to deal with. They can have more time dedicated to the actual pivoting of the Premier circuit itself, which will be very, very interesting to follow up with. And I think ESL is already in a pretty good spot in terms of how they've planned out their major tournaments in terms of Kato and Cologne. It'll be interesting to see how they handle ESL Pro League. It'll be interesting to see how they handle the IEMs. Do they really commit to the overarching world ranking for all of their IEMs, or do they again have more qualifiers to be more involved in the tier 2 circuit? Do they expand the ESL Challenger circuit as well? I mean, there's a lot of options. I think a lot of it is set in stone for right now, but seeing the building blocks being made as of right now is going to be very interesting. I don't really say I have a prediction per se in this situation. This is more of just a take a step back and keep an eye out for these changes as they keep coming. How do other tournament organizers now get involved because the circuit has to open up a little bit? It'll be very interesting. And I really just want to pose this question to keep you as a viewer with an open mind moving forward. And of course, see how the talent respond, how the teams respond, and whatnot. So very curious to see how this shapes up. But it's really just taking a look at these TOs and how they change in 2024. I think the next question that I have to pose to you is where is the game going to be heading tactically? Because as of right now, before we moved to CS2 in Go, you had a lot of slow crawling defaults. Things felt very constrictive, and it didn't necessarily feel like the individual skill was being shown as much as it is right now in CS2, where defaults are much faster. There are less phases in these defaults. Things are being more reliant on contact plays. You have less flashbangs being used. Apparently, according to this study that this guy on Twitter had put out, his name Backpack Brain, that showcased a lot of the usages of flashes and how it's gone down. But even then, like in general, the contacts are coming a little bit higher in strategies. The defaults are faster. You have less rounds to play with as well, so you take less risks in that sense. So overall, the CS2 has completely changed how we actually approach the standard of a T round and how to counteract it. The defaults are much more interesting just because individual skill is being shown a little bit more. And you also have the breaking open of the smokes as well. And you saw how that initially, when we were at IEM Sydney, constantly nades were being used to nuke these smokes to try to explode them, try to make things a little easier for CTs in certain situations. But as time has gone on, people are a lot more methodical with how they use the nades. Some people are saving nades into the post plant, using it to deny ninjas. So there's a lot of different things that has been developed over just these last 3 months alone. And I think that with how CS2 continues to develop, I think we're going to stay at that fast tempo as this game continues to develop. And eventually, I think we will see that same sort of slowdown once you figure out how you can counteract these nades being kicked up how these smokes are kicked up by grenades, and how to slow down these rounds a little bit more. But until then, right now we have these much faster defaults. I think it's going to stay as much until somebody can kind of figure it out when you have maybe a Jame. But even that's the thing, right? If you look at even how Jame is approaching the game, he is finding a way to speed things up as well, where you have on maps like Overpass where you would have much slower defaults. You have players like Norbert and Mir just contacting out of B, getting an opening pick and not committing to the play. And you have 1 minute, 45-second minute executes from Virtus Pro as well. So VP are teams that are adapting faster plays into their playbook. Then I'd like to think that we are heading in that direction and maintaining in that direction. And I honestly think it's good for us as viewers, because it does allow for us to stay a little bit more involved in the game earlier on. That being said, I do feel like how the calling has been going and how fewer rounds are having to be played, I do think you don't have to be as good of a caller into as you were in Go. Conditioning isn't necessarily a predominant thing as of right now because you have less rounds to play with. And I am seeing a lot more of these younger IGLs finding a groove in the game a little bit more, just because they have a finger on the pulse of how to play these faster defaults just a little bit better after being forged in the flames of Tier 2. You look at a Shua, you look at a Kicksan, they just understand the game at a higher level right now. And sure, there are IGLs that are adapting. You look at Apex, you look at Kerrigan, LXCB, they're all figuring out how to play in these faster paced environments. But I do think that younger IGLs are going to be not necessarily hard pressed, because I think they'll feel a little bit more comfortable knowing that they can play a little bit pacier on every round, because those faster defaults are rewarded pretty well. So overall, I think the game is heading to a faster direction. I think it's going to continue to stay there. I think that slowdown might come in 2025, but as of right now, things feel pretty comfortable in terms of those faster defaults and those contact plays. So I'm really looking forward to where the meta is heading. But right now, things feel really nice as a viewer and honestly as an analyst as well to sift through these rounds. The last question that I have to pose is something that's near and dear to my heart. I don't think many people are talking about it as much now because it's just kind of the norm. But I want you to look at these rankings from the beginning of 2021. 2 out of the 10 teams on this list are actually are European international teams here. You move back to 2022, 3 out of the 10 are European international. 2023, 5 out of 10. And to start 2024, 7 out of the top 10 teams in World Counter-Strike right now are European international. And that is absolutely insane to me, that the national team scene has completely died, essentially. Heroic has now gone away, moved international themselves, and that begs the question, is the national team just dead at this point? And it'll be interesting because North America always stays within that conversation to have North American players, and I think that culture is very similar. You look at the CIS region, they can mix and match between Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan, all those different places. Of course, Ukraine, Russia, there's still tough relations there, but that possibility is there, and that's a bit homogenized in that sense. But beyond that, I think the culture has been very odd because it feels as though European international teams are just the norm now, and that is just how it's going to be. So if you go down the list, I'll list out the national teams that still do exist. Furia, Big, Eternal Fire, Astralis, Ents are now full Polish plus Glaive, and I think another noted team as of recent, Sprout, has gone full Danish as well. They're 4+1 Polish as well. And of course the CIS teams have still remained CIS rosters and haven't necessarily dabbled internationally. So a big thing now is that does any of these teams ever have a resurgence? Because you look at those previous years that I was mentioning, and they all had their own unique brand of Counter-Strike that would be very unique to them, that you could look towards, and when you were on a broadcast, you could kind of say that this team plays this team in a rock, paper, scissors type mentality, and so this team might be this team, but this same team might lose to another team because of the style of Counter-Strike mixing and matching, and it always made things very interesting, and that's why I loved having national teams within the brand of Counter-Strike, so you would have those cultures mixing, and that's something that other esports might not have on us, that we would always have that chance to mix and match. But now we're getting to a point where things are becoming much more homogenized because we are having EU international rosters, and so I think it's going to be very interesting to see whether or not whether or not Counter-Strike can continue to have that sort of different brand of Counter-Strike moving forward. And I think that for me, I think that national teams truly are dead. I'd like to be proven wrong by a Furia, by maybe even a Complexity, to potentially try to break the mold and say that, yes, national communication is more important and staying in native tongue is more important than actually mixing and matching talent across the board. So hopefully we do see more national teams, but I do think the national teams are heading down the drain, and we may even have less moving forward into the new year, 2025. But those are my questions that I have to pose. I think some of them are pretty obvious, but I think some of them are definitely a lot more up in the air. I think it'll be very interesting to track these questions as we keep moving forward. But stay tuned. We're going to continue to have this conversation across the many podcasts that I have on this channel and the various narrative videos. And we do demo reviews. We can also touch upon these and continue to build towards that conversation so that when we do move to 2025, we can look back on the year with these predictions, with these questions, and start to pose new ones or maybe tackle very similar ones moving on to the next year. But hopefully you guys enjoy this video. Hopefully you guys would like to join me on this journey that we try to analyze in 2024. Start to take a little bit more of a bigger picture when it comes to esports as a whole and Counter-Strike 2 and where things are headed. But yeah, A lot of good things stuff in the pipeline. Rescope will still be here on a regular basis. Keep track of some more new podcasts that are going to be on this channel, on other channels as well. I will be posting about it. Follow the Twitter. We'll be casting, of course, a lot of qualifiers in the space as well. Covered all the IEM qualifiers last year. We'll be hopefully trying to do the same this year. So keep track of that. I hope you guys enjoyed Atlanta. This is definitely my first video before coming back from Atlanta, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. But if you're here to the end, thank you for watching the videos from last year, and hopefully you guys can join me and continue the journey that we're on in 2024. So thank you guys. Stay tuned to the Paladins Alliance. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.